Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today it is time for another year-end list. I've already done my top 50 best albums of the year, and today it's time to go in the opposite direction and instead do my worst albums of the year. As surprising as it may seem, I actually generally don't go out of my way all that much to listen to music I don't like or at least think I won't like. And so instead of doing an entire top 50, I've only got 10 albums today to talk about of albums that came out this year that I just did not enjoy at all. As this video is a lot more focused on the much more negative side of my opinion, I will just give the obligatory disclaimer that this is purely just my opinion. I don't believe that any of these albums are objectively bad in any way at all, and obviously I have no problem with anyone who does enjoy these albums. I just personally did not find myself liking them at all. And so the first album I have on this list is the new Kid Cudi album, Free. I just found this to be so boring and so empty. This album is literally just 40 straight minutes of boring, soulless slop, which obviously is quite a shame given the highs that Kid Cudi has had throughout his career. But this one, and even just the last few albums, have all been exactly the same, and I'm gonna be honest, I really have no idea what is even motivating him to continue making music at this point, as there is clearly just no heart in this. There is absolutely no creative passion whatsoever. Next on the list is one of the biggest disappointments of the year, which is, of course, Deadbeat by Tame Impala. I was really looking forward to this one, just given how much I've enjoyed every single other Tame Impala album up until this point. But this one just falls completely flat and doesn't even come close to his best work, as this album is just so messy, it's completely incoherent, and it's actually really frustrating just how many genuinely really cool and creative ideas this project does still manage to showcase. But it's just so annoying how every time it does show a cool idea, it just never takes it anywhere, or it takes it in a direction that doesn't work at all. Not to mention just how badly all of the songs fit together, as each one almost feels like an entirely different genre to all of the others, and it's a style that can work occasionally, but not on this project at all. The next album I have here is Pink Elephant by Arcade Fire, which, I mean, I'm sure that by now we're all familiar with how much Arcade Fire have fallen off since The Suburbs, but even compared to some of their absolute worst albums since then, this one is still an absolute embarrassment. Not only just with how badly put together so many of these songs are, but just the album as a whole is such a mess as well, with them still seemingly trying so desperately to hold on to their indie rock roots, but at the same time trying to expand more into dance and electronic music, and the combination that they end up making just doesn't work on any level. And it really does just end up feeling like every song is just an incoherent mess of instruments that do not work well together at all. Not to mention at times how annoying Win Butler's vocals can be as well, as again he's just trying so hard to replicate the sound that they were able to achieve on their first few albums, but ultimately just ends up coming across as whiny and melodramatic more than anything. Next on the list, I of course have to mention the new PartyNextDoor and Drake album, Some Sexy Songs for You. I feel like that album title kind of tells you everything you need to know, and when you listen to it, it's just exactly what you would expect. It's just two artists coming together who have absolutely no chemistry whatsoever and making an album for the sake of making an album. And because of that, I will admit I do think that the worst sin that this album has is just that it's extremely boring, but I think that is still reason enough to have it on this list. As on top of being boring, it's also just so soulless and so generic, and even does have still quite a handful of songs that are just straight up terrible. Particularly just as both Drake and PartyNextDoor are such mediocre rappers and vocalists, and then just that coupled with over an hour of completely boring and generic production, and you just have an album that is a complete slog to get through. Next, at number 6, I have the Taylor Swift album, The Life of a Showgirl, which, given her last couple of projects, I'm not surprised that this one ended up being one of her absolute worst. I will say that I think, in terms of just the general production and the instrumentals, it's definitely far from the worst that she's ever done. I think that that side of it is at least listenable, albeit it is still very generic, as you would expect. However, what truly does make this album so awful is, of course, the cringeworthy lyrics on just about every single song. You would really want to believe that Taylor Swift has matured her lyrical style since the early days, but she's still writing lyrics as if she's a teenager, and to the point where you would actually forget that this woman is engaged and in her 30s. And yet somehow she just seems to be maturing backwards in her writing, as there have obviously just been countless lines and verses from this album that have already been memed to death, and rightfully so, because it's just so easy to poke fun at. After that, I of course do have the Sleep Token album on this list, Even in Arcadia. I will admit that until this album, I was actually somewhat of a Sleep Token defender. I genuinely thought their first album was really good, and the next two are just decent, if nothing else. But now listening to this album, I think I'm finally hearing what other people are hearing when they listen to the first three Sleep Token albums, because this thing is just such an incredible mess, it's embarrassing. There are, of course, still plenty of moments on this project where they attempt their brand of pseudo metal that is just not really metal on any level when it comes down to it. But they do also, I think, experiment with more genres on this album than they have on any of their previous works, and I think that ultimately is what makes this one such a mess, as they're trying to blend genres here that already don't belong together as it is, and then somehow managing to do an even worse job than you would expect. Not to mention just the absolutely ridiculously persistent trap beat that nearly every song has. It's just such an unnecessary addition, and I just find it so rare for that to ever sound good, but especially on a project like this that's already a mess and uses more metal but also pop and R&B leaning influences. The last thing it needs is a trap beat as well. Next on the list is just, of course, the obligatory MGK mention. I feel like every year he releases an album, no worst albums of the year list would be complete without it. And in 2025 he has gifted us with none other than Lost Americana, which sees him completely leaving behind the metal and punk of the last few albums and taking more of a completely bland and generic pop rock sort of direction. And so while I can say that at least this album is definitely not as actively unpleasant to listen to as quite a handful of his others, this is by far the most bland thing I have ever heard from MGK, with every single song on this album featuring the most generic chord progressions, the most generic vocals, the just cringiest and cheesiest lyrics I've ever heard. This album is almost like the midlife crisis of a career that in itself almost feels like an entire midlife crisis, as it already is. Next up, I have the Ed Sheeran album Play, which, I mean, at this point, it's just an average Ed Sheeran album. There really is nothing I can say about it that's even remotely interesting, given that the album itself is already one of the most boring and bland things I've ever heard. Trying to describe it and talk about it is going to be just about that interesting as well. And somehow, despite how generic this album is, at the same time it manages to be a complete mess as well, as this album is just so badly put together. There is no sense of pacing or coherence at all. It's so obvious how Ed Sheeran is just not an album artist at all. He just writes a few songs that get popular, and the rest of it is just filler. And I don't think that I've ever in my life been so bored by an album that is so messy and so badly put together like this one. Next, at my number 2 spot, is an album that, to be honest, the only reason I'm not putting this at number 1 is because it's so bland. I don't think it even deserves the attention of being at number 1, which is the Maroon 5 album, Love Is Like. Many of the albums I've talked about today have been incredibly boring and soulless, but this one really just has to be at the very top of that list, as I think it is more evident on this album than at any of the others I've talked about today that this album exists purely as a means of making money and making music for the sake of it, and not actually out of any sort of creative passion at all. They really do just pull out every single pop cliche in the book on this project, which is impressive considering it's not even half an hour long and they managed to cram that much predictability into such a short album. And then finally, my pick for what is, in my opinion, the worst album of the year. It just has to be Playboi Carti's Music. I will just say that I do at least admire Playboi Carti for his influence on hip-hop over the last few years, However, my appreciation for his music begins and ends at just the influence that he has had, as I find this album and even Whole Lotta Red, I'm not exactly that album's number one fan either, but music even more so is just over an hour of headache-inducing, raw, uncut rage rap, and it's horrible. I truly just do not understand what anyone sees in this album, as I just find it exhausting to listen to, as I just find this to be an experience of listening to song after song after song that just sound almost exactly the same and in the worst way possible. It really does just feel like every single song that was conceived of in the making of this album ended up making the cut, as most of it really does just feel like complete filler, but is still just exhausting and headache inducing to listen to at the same time. And so, for that reason, I think that this truly is the absolute worst album I have listened to that has come out this year. So, I hope that my opinions today didn't make you too angry, and I would also be intrigued to know what all of your worst albums of the year were as well. So, thank you so much for watching this video. Please do let me know what you thought of these albums yourself. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.